Hey folks, it's November 20th. It is Thursday. I want to talk about a few things today. One, we have some flooding threats across the southern U.S., I think over the next few days, even here this morning across portions of Texas. I'm actually starting this map, or the video I should say, with the all hazards map from NOAA, and you can see the flood watches that have been posted for parts of the hill country in Texas up through the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So let me pull up my brush here so I can show you what I'm talking about. These are the flood watches that we're keeping an eye on. We've been talking extensively, I think this month, about these cutoff lows that have been sneaking through here rather slowly. That has brought increased rainfall to the desert southwest, to Southern California, flooding reports from here, number of issues with the surf, and then now we have winter weather advisories all the way down to the transverse ranges in Southern California, into the southern Sierras, and freeze warnings for the high deserts of southeastern Arizona, kind of near and east of Tucson there. So much going on in that portion of the country. If we look across the east, a lot of these gray counties showing up. Those are dense fog advisories, anywhere from like Omaha up near Sioux Falls, down through the Gulf Coast, up toward Pennsylvania. And this tells me that, at least as of early this morning here, this is a foggy start to our day across much of the eastern U.S. And my guess would be that some of these beige statements, these are just special weather statements when there's a little bit of weather moving through, are also related to low visibility and near fog conditions. And if you ever want to get a good gauge of where this fog is settling in, like in the nighttime where it's hard to get a feel for cloud cover on like visible satellite, you can go to infrared. I start a lot of videos like this before the sun comes up across the continental U.S. And the only really obvious clouds here are this large cloud shield associated with that cutoff low, bringing that warm, moist Gulf air up into the central U.S., bringing the rainfall chances back to this corridor here. I can see some low clouds here over Pennsylvania maybe, but it doesn't tell you that there's fog. It certainly doesn't show you that there's fog up along the Missouri River or even down to the Gulf Coast states. So what I do is I go over to what's called the UCAR surface observation page. I should show you how I get there. I just go like this. It's just like muscle memory. Type in UCAR surface, first link that comes up, and then you can just click anywhere on this map to get more fine-grained observations, but I just click over the ocean. That gives you the full national map. All right, there's a lot going on here. It's color-coded. Pink is low clouds. Red is medium, and then you get up to blue, and some of the green colors you're looking at, like high clouds, end up at clear. And so this quickly tells me, well, we have very low clouds all the way from Louisiana up into Pennsylvania, all the way up the Missouri River, even up into the upper Midwest. Now, doesn't necessarily tell you that it is fog, but it tells you they're very low clouds, and that kind of gives you a good hint, at least overnight, that these areas are pretty foggy and socked in here this morning. So just a quick way I kind of start my day to see which areas are starting out cloudy, and you're clear across areas of the high plains and over into New England this morning. That lines up pretty closely with what we're seeing here on infrared satellite. Over the last 24 hours, saw severe storms. I was surprised. I actually have on my phone a little widget which tells me anywhere where there's kind of severe weather happening right now, just to kind of keep an eye on it as a meteorologist. And I was on a flight yesterday over to Oregon, was just surprised that I kept seeing notifications from severe alerts all the way over in Arizona. I say surprised. Well, we shouldn't be that surprised. We have a low moving through. We have some Pacific moisture commingling with Atlantic Gulf moisture pushing up into Arizona here this week. And we actually had a severe thunderstorm on the west side of Phoenix, and I believe on the west side, just coincidentally, of Tucson moving through here. You can see a little MCV maybe spinning up here, but just look how much moisture is moving into the desert southwest with this system here. It's kind of funny. We were forecasting what was supposed to be at least an average or above average monsoon season for the Southwest. We kind of took a few factors into account for that, La Nina being one of them. Sometimes that can produce more tropical systems over in the Eastern Pacific, which it did. We saw a flurry of them earlier this year, and that can help bring moisture up into the desert Southwest. And it did that at times, but we maybe reached slightly below average across our monsoon season, which typically starts in late July, persists through maybe September into a little bit early October. But it was by and large somewhat disappointing, I think, for folks in the desert Southwest who are maybe rooting for that rainfall. And it's kind of funny if you look at the Phoenix year-to-date precipitation, which has been well below average for much of the year, kind of waiting on this monsoon season, which if you look at the historical average of precip accumulations, we can kind of put the start of it let's say early July, and the end of it I'll put here in the middle of September. And that stretch, we saw a few rain events, maybe from those tropical storms that we talked about, but we didn't get anywhere back close to average, which we only needed a few inches of rain to do that, and we didn't even get that. And then right when the monsoon season ends in middle September, that's when we got all this rain. So it's kind of funny. And I wouldn't call this a late monsoon season. This has been dynamically jet stream driven with these cutoff lows moving through. That's not necessarily what we would call like a monsoonal summertime circulation driving this rainfall. It's just been kind of the luck of the draw with how some of these cutoff lows have played out. And it's really kind of been a defining feature, I think, over the last kind of few days, if not the last few weeks, where the Southwest has stayed wet. Other areas of the country have stayed drier. If we look at just the surface winds this morning, if you have a wide area of fog and calm winds are best friends. So anywhere where you have kind of a lot of fog, you're probably going to find a lot of calm winds. So naturally, if you kind of look across the eastern portion, it's called like the eastern 1/3 of the country here. I mean, just not a lot of wind, maybe a little bit over the Carolinas, a little bit here in southern Illinois, but plenty of calm wind. And then we have some moisture still kind of lightly pushing up in here, allowing that fog to condense, and that shows you where that fog is. Another exercise I like to do when looking at a map like this is show me the best moisture flux, or where is the moisture coming in from areas that we can source it, i.e. the Atlantic or the Gulf, sometimes the Pacific. And if you kind of play that exercise out, okay, well, we have decent flow down through the Caribbean, up into the Gulf, pushing, more so toward the northwest. Obviously, it's not kind of funneling in here, right? We just talked about the calm winds over this area. And so my best moisture flux into the continental U.S. is like, okay, I'm drawing these streamlines in. Let's draw this one in. There seems to be a kind of funneling of moisture right up into this corridor here, just looking at these surface winds here. And another way we can do this is a lot of that moisture return happens really just above the surface. Happens at the surface as well, but let's go up to like 850, the lowest levels of the atmosphere here. And it's much clearer here that moisture turns funneling right into portions of central and west Texas here this morning. So it shouldn't be a surprise really if we jump back and look. The all hazards map, there's those flood watches posted right along the terminus of that moisture return that's surging up into Texas here this morning. And if we go ahead and pull up the radar mosaic, let's see if I can load that. That rainfall is already coming down, so that it's not a forecast exercise. We're just seeing what's happening. And we actually have rainfall all the way through Arkansas, southern Illinois, southeast Missouri, and getting over into the Ohio River Valley now. That rainfall that we talked about in Arizona and New Mexico yesterday that I showed you is starting to push a little bit further east, but some showers lingering over Arizona, including over here in central California. And it's this corridor here today where we're worried about flooding, just because of that moisture flux. There's some passing showers through this area here, some decent rains in some areas that need it, but that's the corridor with that best moisture flux that we identified on the slide before. Jump over to look at current temperatures here this morning. I'll update, and I apologize, I'm recording this a little bit later than usual this morning because I'm on Pacific time, and the internet's a little bit slower, which you might notice in some of the later slides here. Nonetheless, starting to warm up across the southeast U.S. here with that southerly flow coming up in, starting to push a little bit more moisture and warmth into this area here. The rainfall falling along that kind of temperature gradient that you can see between Nebraska and like Arkansas here. Cooler in the west, much cooler over in Montana, the Canadian Prairie to Alberta, and cooler in New England here. But by and large, starting to warm up here, at least relative to late November for a wide area of the country. I do want to jump back here and pull up the jet stream level winds. We'll just go all over this plot here today. And I'm going to bring this down. Let's do 500. Allow us to identify some of these features a little bit easier. Here's our cutoff low. It's pushing into Texas, bringing that moisture up into the southern plains here today. We actually have another system diving down into California that's helping to produce those showers that we just looked at in the Central Valley. It's not related to that last low. This is a new system that's coming in. It's going to get a little bit of a kick from this jet streak that we can identify here south of Alaska. So when I say jet streak, obviously this is the jet stream here. I'll just kind of trace that out. I apologize, I'm on a trackpad, so my accuracy is not as good, but there you go, I apologize for that. But an area of the jet stream that has particularly strong winds and a smaller corridor is what we call a jet streak. So you can identify one here. Maybe you could argue that's one. I wouldn't really call those jet streaks, but maybe another one over here. And it's an area that is even a little bit better at kicking off some of these upper level lows or low pressure systems near the surface associated with them. So keep an eye on that as that swings around. Want to cover just the last 24 hours of precipitation. Got some showers here in the Pacific Northwest. This is often the case through winter. We've been somewhat wet in the Pacific Northwest, particularly like the Willamette Valley in Oregon. But this is a time of year they get a lot of rainfall. And so just being slightly wet actually means relative to average that they've actually been drier over the last 14 days. And I'm going to talk about that in just a few slides because that's going to, I think, change as we look further out into the forecast. See the desert Southwest precipitation already this morning in very localized ways have produced decent rainfall already. just here this morning, I mean, you're looking at like 2 inches plus potentially. These values here are over population centers. So it's just kind of the fact that this says 1.8, well, I bet just toward the northeast of that, northeast of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you're up into like 2 to 3 inches already this morning. Similar story over here in the hill country. And more of that today. It wouldn't take another kind of few pushes of that to get us into like 5, 6, 7 plus inch territory. And now you're talking about a flooding threat, which is why those flood watches have been posted. Decent rains getting into the mid-south up in Missouri and pushing into Illinois. Some areas here still dry, lingering that fall drought into late November. And I think they'll take the rain at this point. I did want to show you, this is looking out over the next 2.5 days here. So it shows us that next cutoff low pushing into Southern California. Again, some of these rainfall values, transverse ranges, even like South LA down through San Diego, 2 to 3 inches here. That flooding threat's going to persist into this weekend here for California, particularly over the next 24 to 48 hours. I'm going to play this out. This is just through this evening here on Thursday. There's all that rain all the way up to the Red River in southeast Oklahoma, cutting across Arkansas. And it's this localized corridor. It's not clear what exactly, which cities are going to get the most of it. But if you're in this kind of corridor here, even the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, the chances that you spike up to like 5+ inches of rain in just a short, 12-hour period are increasing. And that's enough to cause, flood threat almost anywhere in the continental U.S. Still kind of waiting this evening on that next cutoff low as it tracks south through California. Let's take this all the way through this evening. And really it's overnight tonight into Friday morning when the heaviest rain is expected to fall across Southern California. That continues through the day as this is a slow-moving system. And that rain now from that first system spreading across the Ohio River Valley before kind of skirting the Carolinas here. I don't want to jump back. This is the 500 millibar vorticity map, kind of help us identify in the forecast where these cutoff lows are going. So here's the next one. It's pushing to California now. Here's our original one. And this forecast is a little old. Let's bring this to like present day. There's 6 a.m. So yeah, it's actually already impacting Central California. This one helping to produce that southwest flow across Texas and Oklahoma. We always look for that for increased precipitation chances. And there we go. Now we got the rainfall across Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri as a result of that here this morning. If I play this forecast forward, that cutoff low weakens, pushes east. That's why those Ohio River Valley precipitation values that we just looked at weren't quite as strong as they were over the southern plains, and why Carolina's not getting as much out of this. But there's that cutoff low parked just south of San Diego, bringing persistent rainfall through Friday into that area, slowly working into the Four Corners region this weekend. We have a glancing system coming through the northeast, Ontario, Quebec, Canadian Maritimes, glancing New England here with a cold front. It's really the only other system to talk about because we've had this persistent, I'm going to call it annoying because it's starting to get old. Flow to the north, weak clipper systems really coming through like Canada, maybe clipping the upper Midwest. We can actually see that here this morning. Jump back, let's see if I can find that radar. Yeah, okay, maybe into the upper peninsula of Michigan. I don't want to exclude you guys, but that's way up there. And by and large, the northern tier of the country, it's been quiet, outside of just these kind of temperature changes back and forth. And as that cutoff low now Sunday pushes into the southern plains, expecting additional precipitation here. This is now Monday, the 24th. See, still likely cold over New England. We have that flow across the Canadian border here up into the Canadian prairie. But it's this system that's going to be the weather maker early next week as it pushes through the Midwest, bringing rainfall to this area here. Doesn't look particularly strong. Might see some severe storms on the southern edge of it. But again, this isn't the strongest system. I wouldn't expect any sort of severe outbreak from this. But decent rainfall and some thunder, I think, through the Mississippi Valley early next week. We actually have a decent clipper system now moving through the upper Midwest. The middle part of next week, we're getting into Thanksgiving. And in probably the most, unceremonious fashion, we're slowly building in troughing now to the eastern 2/3 of the country. It isn't one of these huge systems coming through. I just mentioned that early next week. We just have this kind of weakening cutoff flow, similar to the one that we're seeing this week, push through the Midwest. We have this reinforcing clipper system coming in behind it, which actually looks a little bit stronger, moving through the upper Midwest by the middle part of the next week. And, if I get out to like Thanksgiving proper, let's do like Thursday evening. Let's get it all there. 6 p.m. Thursday evening. Without much fanfare, we now have a ridge over San Diego. That's the opposite that we were dealing with in the first 7 days of this forecast. And suddenly there's a trough here. All the way down through Arkansas, Illinois. And we didn't really have a huge system come through, except for over in New England. So if I pull this forecast back a bit, I want to keep an eye on New England, because if I take this forecast further out, this trough slowly by the end of the week starts to consolidate. You can see that there. All these kind of little lobes and pieces of it coming through start to amplify. And by the end of the week, we have a deep system here over in the Pacific Northwest bringing proper rainfall to Oregon and the Willamette Valley, unlike, the kind of wet that I talked about earlier, and a potential, Miller B type cyclone / nor'easter for New England. Now, before I, put too much weight or confidence into that forecast, well, we have to talk about the fact that we are 10 days out in the forecast at this point. But we have seen this kind of nor'easter type look start to show up in the long range, and it's worthwhile mentioning. Now, snow possibilities, I'm not going to get into the details 10 days out. I'd be a fool to try to do that right now, but that potential is there. And with that general week troughing next week, just kind of across the east, we're going to be bringing temperatures down for much of the east for the holiday week. The good news is some of these earlier forecasts had, that trough coming through vigorously the middle to late part of next week, and that would have caused much more, I think, holiday disruption. So I'm going to stop talking about it and just show you it on the ECMWF forecast here, just the ECMWF to start. All right, I'm going to play this forecast quickly through the first period because we kind of already talked about this. There's that weakening low here this week. This is now Friday. There's that next cutoff low south of San Diego. Lingering precip through the Four Corners region as we go through the weekend. Little weak system here coming through the Pacific Northwest with snow up in British Columbia, the Canadian Prairie. We talked about some of that flow, along the Canadian border. Here comes our next system through the central and southern plains, potentially with some severe weather. But again, I'm not super bullish that that's going to be news making. There's that little clipper system there over the Canadian Prairie, and then that weakens as it pushes east again with thunderstorms down the cold front toward the Gulf Coast. This is now Tuesday, November 25th. Rainfall pushing east, a little bit through the southeast, through the mid-Atlantic. Some snowfall through New England, deeper low up here over Ontario and Quebec. And it's all the while we're actually building that troughing in to the eastern U.S. with just that weak system coming through. There's that reinforcing system, and behind it, not much precipitation. Some here across the southeast late next week, the day after Thanksgiving. And then here with that trough now consolidating, this was that time when we saw that vorticity really ramp up in this corridor here, and that is helping to produce this deeper low off the east coast. And there's your Miller B kind of nor'easter type look with gangbuster snow across the Berkshires and New England. Again, I don't want to put too much weight into the exact details of where the snow is going to occur now in that next deeper system, but we do now have better flow in this corridor here. So better flow across the Pacific Northwest, cooler air getting into the east, and then wrapping up into a potential nor'easter way late next week. This is always Saturday, 10 days out next week. Now, the good news in the forecast, if I show you just like the quick 10-day precipitation departures from average, we're wetter across the southern plains, the central plains into the southeast in this forecast, wetter in portions of Oregon and the Willamette Valley. I actually think that Washington and Portland get in on some of this precipitation. I don't know how sharp that, if the line's going to end up exactly like it is from the ECMWF here. The good news is the last 14 days, and I talked about this last week, we've been wet here, dry here, and dry here. And now, in the forecast, particularly like starting 5 days out as that last cutoff low comes through California, we're going to shift drier here, I think wetter here, and wetter here, flipping that pattern around over the next 10 days. And even the last 60 days, that was just the last 14, the departures from average for accumulated precip. But like that pattern's still there in the last 60. We have lingering summer drought here in Oregon. Lingering summer drought here across the southeast, Houston, 7 inches below rainfall, or 7 inches off just the last 2 months of rainfall accumulations from normal. So this area going over wetter, I think, is good news going into winter. You can see that here on the 10-day departures from average. As everyone probably wants to know, as I want to know, where's the snow coming? Well, this latest kind of forecast trends, if you like snow, maybe look away, unless you live in New Hampshire or New England here. Playing this forecast out, with these cutoff lows sneaking through here, just the highest elevation, the Rockies, getting some snowfall here. You can see there's that winter weather advisory all the way down there by Big Bear. And taking this further out, glancing clipper system here, maybe a dusting, but it's not really till the end of the period where you're looking at substantial snowfall totals over in New England. Again, don't take this verbatim 10 days out, and don't believe anybody else who can pin down how much and where the snowfall is coming 10 days out. We'll have a much better, I think, understanding of just the relative potential of that corridor 3 to 4 days from now over the weekend. Quickly wanted to touch on temperatures, kind of glossed over those in the beginning, early part of the video. Minimum temperatures wise, there's those freeze warnings. This is tomorrow morning on Friday for southeast Arizona and the high desert region southeast of kind of surrounding the Tucson area. Warm across much of the rest of the country. You're looking at freezes up in the upper Midwest with some of that flow coming through. I mentioned the cold fronts kind of sneaking through New England this weekend, so we're cold there. I mean, by and large, on the warmer side, at least relative to those overnight temperatures through the next few days. It's not till Wednesday when that troughing starts to push in slowly that we start to see temperatures come down. Now, I'm going to pull the max temperatures back the next few days. Again, it's going to look similar. We're warm largely across much of the continental U.S. with these kind of that southwest flow bringing warmth into the east along with that rainfall. It's not till Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we're going to see those temperatures come down next week with much colder air pushing in to the central and eastern part of the country. We can see this on our temperature pattern here. Next 5 days, warm across most areas of the country, save for New England. 5 to 10 days, that takes us into the next work week. We're cooling down significantly in the Canadian Prairie. Very cold temperatures expected there. Well into the negatives, both Celsius and Fahrenheit. And then if you look, we're starting to get some of that into the Midwest as we go through the holiday. And then finally, day 10 to 15, this actually takes us well into December at this point. That air is starting to bleed out into the plains, particularly the high plains, central and northern plains. So potential for much colder air as we start December for that corridor here. Now what we're not seeing, and I'm just going to let's pick on the ECMWF ensemble. What I'm not necessarily seeing is 5 to 10, right? We were cold here. I'm not seeing this huge push yet into the eastern U.S. I think it's going to be colder, certainly. I mean, colder than average in early December is cold. But it's not this like brutal cold that there were some hints at earlier. That could change, but at least right now, forecasts are keeping a lot of that more brutal cold, maybe even over into the central and high plains. For now, we'll see where that kind of forecast shifts. See the AIFS, the operational run shows that potential, again, that first week of December, much colder air over the western plains. With that kind of cold front coming through, that troughing over the east that we talked about, and that cold air over the central plains, if we look day 8 to 14, we're starting to see here with that cold air here, you can imagine the jet's going to be kind of running around that cold air, and so we see better flow, better precipitation here. But there's I think a bigger story here even than this cold air, and it's what you're kind of seeing, starting to see hints of with this dry weather here, and it's a ridge that we're seeing build over into the Gulf of Alaska in the long range, and it's kind of, and it's changing our forecast around a little bit. Eric talked about it for a bit yesterday. I'm going to play this forecast back, and I'm going to start us on Black Friday. This is Friday, November 28th. There's that troughing that we talked about, helping to develop that potential nor'easter across New England, potentially Miller-B cyclone, ridging, moving back over the western U.S. This makes sense, based on that forecast that we just went through. But keep an eye on this ridge here south of Anchorage. I play this forecast forward. This starts to get pretty dominant. And it starts to park here. It's December 1st all the way Monday, December 2nd, 3-4 days. This ridge is just sitting here. What this is doing is it's allowing weak troughing to build into the west and that return flow coming up into the eastern U.S. And this is likely going to keep this corridor wetter and maybe even warmer, the storm track kind of in this area here. Now, this is just the ECMWF ensemble. It's also highlighting much cooler air now settling in, this troughing over the Hudson Bay. It kind of looks like that, getting closer to that maybe positive TNH pattern that has been forecasted a bit for December here. What's interesting about this forecast is at least for a bit after Thanksgiving, that Monday of that next week, we could shift warmer and wetter for the eastern U.S. with this troughing over the western U.S. So take the forecast forward, that starts to break down as this ridge flattens out and we bring cold air back. But at least that the initial part of that next week, we could see a warm up. We're well ahead of the forecast here, just looking at like the crystal ball, but you can see it even in the operational runs. That was the ensemble that I just showed you. Here's the ECMWF AIFS, and I was surprised to see how strong this ridge was on the AIFS. It is also seeing that strong Gulf of Alaska ridge. It's helping to produce this trough here across the Four Corners region. That's going to keep us Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, if this develops, warm and wet across the central U.S. and warmer across the eastern U.S. Look at how strong this ridge is from the AIFS. We're 300 hours out in the forecast. Can't put too much weight into this yet, but given the agreement between this, the GFS, and the ECMWF, that it seems that the cold that's settling in Thanksgiving and that holiday weekend could be short-lived for the central and eastern U.S., and with more rainfall coming in behind it. Again, not your best snow forecast if you're in that area here. But we're also starting to see this in the ECMWF extended model, which we've shown extensively here. If I take it into like early December, let's do the first week of December. There's that Gulf of Alaska ridge. That's necessarily a big ridge here. You're going to have to produce some sort of trough downstream of it, and then a ridge to the east of that. Bring that warmth and that precipitation chance back across the Midwest, Southern Plains, Central Plains, maybe even the Southeast, and then setting up potential cold air in the second week of December. That's this pattern that we were waiting on in December that we had some decent confidence in, with ridging to the west, trough anchored over the Hudson Bay, and shots of cold air into the middle part of the country in the eastern U.S. That's still the forecast in the long range, the whole December temperature forecast. We can see the anomalies here. Colder across the prairie with the cold front racing through the Midwest into the east at times, and your flow kind of coming up in between it like this. Potentially wetter here, potentially wetter in the southeast with snow chances, maybe more so than usual across the Midwest than we typically get in December here. I think that's my last slide today. Coming up at time here. Eric will talk with you all tomorrow on Friday. As for today, thanks for watching.